wondering why didn't we just start with this module? Because then we would have known exactly how to do an SSA from the beginning. The reason is because it's really important that everyone understands the safe system principles, you know, how our body is only able to withstand a certain amount of force before death or serious injury occurs. So we just need to have that kind of very solid understanding of the safe system prior to actually talking about the details of the SSA. So hopefully we get a bit more of an applied approach in today's session. So we've gone through things like the safe system. We've got a good understanding of this type of diagram and the pillars associated with the safe system, acknowledging that human bodies are vulnerable. We've spent a lot of time going through this risk framework, really focusing on exposure and trying to hone in on that is always associated with the volumes. And then also had a discussion around the likelihood and severity. So we've been feeding this information to you deliberately to then give you all of that background knowledge to then complete this component, which is how to actually conduct an SSA. Of course, we spoke about the different crash types and those impact speeds associated with them. So when we think about our collisions with vulnerable road users, that green curve there, we take the speed of around 30 kilometers per hour. For our collisions, like in a T-bone intersection crash type, we take the 50 kilometer per hour impact speed. And where we've got head-on type collisions potentially occurring, we reflect on the 70 kilometer per hour. So those kind of thresholds are regularly referenced and something that we also just need to get into our mind as we go on to apply this framework. I think we may briefly cover off this severity scoring chart, which you may have noticed that there's numbers in there, and maybe they didn't make a whole lot of sense, but after today's session, it'll be a bit clearer as to why we've got numbers within that diagram. Along the kind of y-axis, we've got different crash types, and then along the other x-axis, we've got the crash speeds there. So we'll talk about exactly why those numbers are there as well today. I do hope to give you a little bit of extra time at the end of today. So I'm going to try and be a little bit more persistent going through today's content so that you've got a little bit more time to complete quizzes, and you've also got to go through an assignment at the end of today as well. So I'd love to give you some time back so you can get your head around all of that information. But of course, what I'm going to go through today is how do we actually undertake a safe system assessment. And to get the ball rolling, I will ask Marissa to please launch a poll just so I can get some immediate information about people's current experience with the SSAs. So the question in the poll is, what has been your involvement with safe system assessments? And the answers that you can answer: nothing, safe system what now? I've heard the term, but don't know much more. I've had one done on our projects. I've done one, or I live, breathe, and eat safe system assessments. So those are your options. We're not going to be critiquing this. So this is an anonymous poll. So we just like to see the level of experience within this space. So I'll give you another 5 seconds just to fill that one out. All right, that might do it. Don't be stressed if you didn't get around to it, and we'll end the poll there and share the results. And it's super exciting to hear that we've got a couple of respondents saying that they live, breathe, and eat safe system assessments. So you're welcome to correct me if you do anything differently as part of your processes, or you've got a slightly different view on things. I welcome that feedback. Good to hear that people have done one or that they've had some done for their projects. And those that have heard the term but don't know much more, that's also completely fine because we're going to be going through that in a bit of detail today. So good to hear we've got a bit of diversity. Now, the way that we kind of run this module is, of course, reflecting on the Safe System Assessment Framework, which the Austroads developed several years ago now, late 2016. And Ken Beer, the principal engineer at Safe System Solutions, he was on the working group for this and got to be involved in a lot of the discussions for putting this type of document together. Of course, when this framework was first realized, it hadn't been applied. So in many sense, this document was theoretical. This is how we want to see safe system assessments rolled out, but it hadn't actually been industry tested. And we've seen over time that there are a few, professional judgment calls that need to be made. And that's why we've seen other jurisdictions, state governments, release their own safe system assessment framework guidelines just to help to fill those little gaps that we've got in this document. Austroads is going to be working on a project to update this framework, just to, recognize that industry now has, had this for 7 years and have learned what can be improved within this document. So I'm sure we'll see another edition of this soon. But this is definitely what we'll be referring to. And I should say that even those jurisdiction updates still very much reflect what's within the Austroads. It's not like there's, clear departures or anything like that, which is taking on a different tangent. It's just, as I said, filling in those gaps where there's a little bit of a grey area. How would we apply this framework? The reason that this document did come about was because there was a lot of talk within the industry around different types of treatments and different professionals kind of debating, well, is that a safe system treatment or is that not a safe system treatment? And there was no real, I suppose, way to quantitatively agree on, what would determine whether that's safe system or not. And this document really highlights that, well, safe system treatments are not quite binary. It's not like, yes, that's a safe system project and no, that one isn't. In fact, it's more of a scale, and we'll actually talk about the scale that's used to measure safe system performance as part of today's session. So that's how it's kind of come about. It's just to provide professionals within this area to be able to display how their existing conditions of a road environment aligns with safe system principles, or how their proposed design or designs improve safe system performance. But it's not that binary of, yes, this is a safe system project, this one is not. It's more demonstrating, where on that scale does it fit. If it's at this end of the scale, then it aligns very, very well with what we're talking about, the safe system framework. If it's on the other end, then no, it does not, and there's room for improvement. So I did speak about those additional jurisdictional guidelines documents. So we've got the one on the left here from Victoria. The one in the middle here is from South Australia. Others have been created. South Australia's in particular, they very much follow what is produced New South Wales and Queensland. So they're all very, very similar. There's not significant differences, as I said. The one in New Zealand, though, is quite significantly different. And I don't believe we have any Kiwis on the line. So we don't need to worry about talking through that one. Because they've gone with a different approach. They have actually departed from what is within the Austroads framework, and they've got a different way of doing things. So just be mindful if you're doing any work over there, or if you're planning on a new life over in NZ, that they do have a different safe system assessment type of framework. But within Australia, we've got a fairly, relatively homogenized setup. Queensland is the only jurisdiction that got like their own kind of template, which differs a little bit more, and they've got little spreadsheets and things to fill in. So TMR do have a little bit of a different approach, but once again, I wouldn't call it a departure. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual, and rather than take you through the SAFE System Assessment Framework kind of page by page, you probably worked out by now that's just not my style. That's not my presentation intent. I much prefer to give you the tangible kind of details and then work through it as if we were actually conducting something like this. So I'm actually going to skip straight to the end of a SAFE System Assessment report and show you, well, what is the output of an SSA? Like, why are we doing this? And as part of an SSA, you would likely see something that looks like this. So I'm going to talk through exactly what we're seeing here. So this is a bar graph where we've got different crash types. So you can see run-off road, head-on, intersection, other, pedestrian, cyclist, motorcyclist. Those are all different crash types. And each of those bars represent a different kind of state or scenario. The red bar, as you can see in the legend that's just below, is representing existing conditions. So every time you see that red bar in all of those different scenarios, that reflects what is currently out there as analyzed by the SAFE System Assessment team. The orange bar, the one next to it, and I apologize for anyone that's colorblind, but the color next to that one is, well, this project is looking into perhaps removing the existing conditions, upgrading that, and installing a roundabout. So that is what that little diagram there is showing. And that's one of the design options. The other design option is to create a modified T signalized intersection. And that is the third bar along in each of those little clusters. Design option 3B, as it's referred to, is the final bar in each cluster, which is a T intersection that is signalized. So what's happened is this is at concept design, and the client has produced some different options. And they've said, you know what, let's do a SAFE System assessment to see how well these design options rank in terms of their alignment with SAFE System principles. So really, really handy to have graphs like this to readily see where is, the risk still present. So just as an example, I can see within the motorcyclist crash category there that the risk has not changed in either of those design options compared to the existing conditions. Like, it's not getting better, it's not getting worse in this particular example. That's actually not uncommon, unless it's like a motorcycle safety project where you're actually intervening with treatments specifically to improve motorcycle safety. It's not uncommon to see no benefit for motorcyclists. The other thing that you may have noticed is for the roundabout option, the risk for cyclists is increasing. And that is like a wonderful high level. If you don't read the whole report, you just look at these graphs and you can be like, well, why is the risk getting worse for that road user group for this investment that I'm potentially going to be, putting forward money or asking money from the government for? And so that provides some pretty good intel. Well, why are we getting an increase in crash risk there? And, well, why are the other options just about the same for that category as well? With the other ones, so for run-off road, for the roundabout, you can see that there's a decrease in crash risk. The head-on, you can see there's a decrease, more substantial than the other ones. Intersection, you can see for the roundabout, I've got so many arrows going on this slide now. Apologies for that. Intersection, you can see significantly lowers the score there for the roundabout. The other ones kind of creep up and up. Now, the way that you can kind of review these scores is the lower the score, the better the performance with the Safe System framework. So I'll just repeat that. A good way to think of it is lots of our jurisdictions have committed to, aiming towards 0 for fatal and serious injuries on our transport network. And we ideally want to see our scores aimed towards 0 as well. So the lower your score indicates an improved alignment with Safe System principles. So you want to try and get lower and lower scores, just like golf. Marissa. Oh, you're on mute there, Marissa.
Gets me every time. How is the crash risk defined or measured?
Very good. We do have some slides which will talk exactly about that and how we calculated that. So I'll just park that for a moment.
No worries.
Now, as I said, I started with the output, but now I'm going to go back and think, well, how did we get to these kind of figures? And very much the first thing that you would be doing as part of an SSA is understanding the project context. All of these prompts, which are just questions, are provided in the Austroads framework, and it is basically trying to understand and articulate how the existing road context functions. What is the surrounding land use? What's the speed? What percentage of heavy vehicles? Movement in place classification, if you've got that type of information. Are there particular areas of interest? Do you know if there's particular desire lines for pedestrians, or are you aware of any, events that are held at this particular location that could influence certain scorings and things like that? So this is one of the first things that you would complete as part of a Safe System assessment, which is basically describing your existing conditions and just putting a real nice summary of what is the traffic environment and how do people access this area and who's accessing this area as well. I don't think there's anything particularly groundbreaking about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I feel like, in lots of our reporting, business cases, or even road safety audits, we tend to, dot point all this down. This is just an actual prompt list that's generally put in a table where you just kind of jot down your points that relate to all these different questions. So this really just sets the scene. This is where I'm going to spend quite a bit of time. And this is referred to as the Safe System Matrix. Of course, it's a table, but to sound more professional, called a matrix. So what we have along our column headings, different crash types. So we've got run-off road, head-on, intersection, other, pedestrian, cyclist, motorcyclist. Question may be, well, why are these crash types selected? And the reason is because as Austroads started to develop this framework, they had a bit of a research into what are the most common, fatal and serious injuries occurring across our network, and quite conveniently lumped them into these types of categories. They also reflect very well on our DCAs or our RUM codes. So DCA, definition for classification of accidents. RUM codes, I've forgotten it. I knew I'd forget it. Road user movement codes, something like that. I use DCAs where I am. But it's just basically if crashes occur, there's a specific code that is associated with that. And then it gets categorized into columns very, very similar to these. So it kind of links into that type of thinking. I'm going to spend a bit of time now and just discuss around, what do these crash types mean? So a run-off road crash is, of course, if you've got a vehicle that exits or veers out of their traffic lane and then collides with something off the carriageway. It could be, a barrier system, or it could be a tree, or it could be a utility pole. Those are your run-off road type crashes. A head-on crash, kind of self-explanatory. Two oncoming vehicles collide head-on. That's the head-on category. Intersection, once again, quite understandable, is any of those crashes that are occurring at intersections. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing or a bit muddled here, where if you happen to run off road at an intersection, you would actually call that a run off road crash. Like the intersection just happens to be there, but you veered out of your lane and you've collided with a traffic signal, as an example. That would still be categorized as a run off road. The intersections are more like your, 90-degree crash types running through red lights, two right turns that are sideswiping each other, those types of crashes. The other crash type is this wonderful catch-all where you, as the safe system assessor, can put your own definition as to what other means. Really, really common ones that are put in the other category are sideswipe crashes, because that's not catered for anywhere else. Crashes with parked vehicles, that's usually put in this category as well. Crashes with trains or trams or, level crossing, those types of things. Once again, you can see that's not captured anywhere else. So that's put in this column here. Another big one I'm just thinking at the top of my head would be crashes with animals. Once again, doesn't necessarily fit in those other categories, so you just chuck it in there. So that's one is a little bit open to interpretation, where you get to put your own crash category into that space. Pedestrian, any crash that involves a pedestrian. So once again, the pedestrian could be at an intersection, but if the collision is with a pedestrian, you would be marking that as a pedestrian collision. Same goes with cyclist. Once again, the same is for motorcyclists. So it's solely focused within the actual user there. So those are our different crash types. Now what I'm going to look at is, I'll stop and pause for Marissa. Yep.
Good timing. Is there a list of possible other crashes in the Austroads guide?
Yes, I believe there are. It has been a while since I've looked at that document. As I said, I'm fairly familiar with it, and I just kind of churn these things out now. But from memory, there are some descriptions of those. So in case you forgot those examples I just put through, you'll be able to reference them.
Correct. Thanks, Max.
That's okay. So I've gone through the columns. Now I'm going to go through our rows, and I'm just going to look at the row headings. And believe it or not, look what we've got. We've got exposure, likelihood, and severity. And now you might understand why we've been banging on about these terms so frequently, is because they explicitly relate to how we calculate risk, which is what this matrix does. So they're absolutely essential to understand comprehensively before you're able to fill this table out. So if you don't understand what those terms are, you couldn't do this table. That's kind of why we spent so much time going through those terms. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through these cells kind of one by one and talk you through them. So it's going to be a bit of time on this. And I'm also going to have to go in between slides as well, because the scoring system is on different slides, which is a little bit annoying, but stick with me, please. So exposure, in my opinion, is the easiest of all of these cells to be able to complete. Because as we've mentioned multiple times, it's absolutely linked to your volumes. So in my first cell there, I've got run-off road, and I've got a little dot point there, which is basically what do I need to look out for? And it's saying your AADT, your annual average daily traffic, that's two-way. Okay, so it's both directions, annual average. I'm going to just make up a scenario. There is no rhyme or reason for what I'm about to describe here. I just think it's useful to actually start to see how this table gets filled in. And I'm going to say in this environment that I'm completely made up, there are 4,000 vehicles per day. So that is what I'm going to take. So I'm just going to make a little note and say that there's 4,000, 4K. Now, what I need to do is I need to reference the Safe System Matrix scoring guide, which is, of course, also produced within the Austroads document, which is on the next few slides. So I'm just going to jump through this and have a look at what that one looks like. This table has got the exposure, likelihood, and severity rather than in the rows on the columns. So you can see that's exposure, that's likelihood, that's severity. For the time being, just ignore these. Let's just look at exposure. I would warrant a score of 0 where there is no exposure to a certain crash type. They've given us some examples. This might mean there is no side flow or there's no intersecting roads, no cyclists, no peds, no motorcyclists. Well, that's not the case. I've just told you that there's 4,000 vehicles, so I know I'm not giving it a score of 0. I now move to my next category, which is a score of 1. And I always just skip over that little preamble. I'm an engineer, I just look straight to the numbers. For runoff road, head-on, and other crash types, AADT is less than 1,000 vehicles per day. Give it a score of 1. Well, that's once again not the case. So I'm going to skip over to my next slide, which shows scores 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the highest score you can give. So you can only give between 0 and 4. Score of 2 is where AADT is between 1,000 and 5,000. I said 4,000, so I know I'm going to give a score of 2. Just to close it all off, I'll read through the scores of 3 and 4. 3 is where AADT is between 5 and 10,000. 4 is where AADT is greater than 10,000 vehicles per day. But as I said, we're going to be doing a score of 2. So we've got 4,000. So I put 2 there. Head on, once again, it just uses the AADT. And I've already just done that exercise, so I know I can do 2 there as well. I don't need to look at that one again. So that's pretty convenient. The intersection. This one, in my opinion, is one of those ones where when Austroads does update the Safe System Assessment Framework, we'll need to reevaluate, because I think the way that it is done at the moment is within industry. Oh, sorry, I should start by saying within the Austroads Assessment Framework, it's a grey area exactly how you would determine the exposure for intersections. Jurisdictional guidance does improve that. However, in my opinion, I think it is very, very conservative the way that it does this. And I'll show you the way that industry does it and the way that we want you to do it within your assignments. Okay, so this is the way that you calculate your intersection AADT for your assignments and going forward, because this is how industry does it. If we've got a T intersection, like so, and I've already told you this main thoroughfare has an AADT of 4,000 vehicles per day, and this intersecting road, two-way, has 2,000 vehicles per day. To get your intersection AADT, you sum those lengths. So for the intersection, you've got 6,000 AADT. That's how it's currently used. As I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of this. I just apply it because that's the way that it's used. I think it is an overrepresentation, but that is currently what our industry does to measure exposure risk at intersections. It is the sum of your AADTs. Within your assignments, if you've got an intersection, you similarly need to sum your AADTs. Now, I'm going to go back to the score graph to double check what score I would give it. And I can see if the AADT is between 5 and 10,000 there, I give it a score of 3. So I go back to my little messy diagram here, and I'm going to have to start getting some stuff. And I'm going to put a 3. Did I have any questions there, Marissa, on the intersections? Because that usually stumbles people, and it stumbles me.
We've just got a question about, I'll read it out to you, regarding runoff road crash type. Does a roadside barrier reduce the severity or likelihood? Hitting a barrier is still a runoff road crash, but the severity is likely to be lower than if there was no barrier present.
That's a great question, and we'll give a prize out there, Marissa. So if your existing condition, there's no roadside safety barrier, and if errant vehicles are to run off the road, maybe they're going to strike fixed objects, trees, utility poles, or, steep batters and things like that. So that would have a very, very high severity score. I haven't talked yet about the severity score, but that goes in this last row there. Conversely, if I'm putting in a roadside safety barrier, you would assume that that is going to drastically improve, that roadside errant vehicle crash. So that severity in the future case where there is a barrier there would have a lower severity score. So I would just put it in the severity category. If you've got a roadside edge barrier that's incredibly close to the edge of the traffic lane, you could potentially say that's going to increase the likelihood of runoff road crashes because, you're going to have those nuisance impacts and things like that. But very much the severity is reduced. Very, very good question.
Okay, thanks, Max. How would you sum a rural dogleg crossroad? Am I saying that right? By dogleg, yeah. A crossroad modified not to be straight through.
Great question. So this could also be appropriate if you've got any cross intersections as well, but I will take the dogleg as an example. You haven't heard of the dogleg term, Marissa? No?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Something like that, where it's kind of staggered off each other. Now, the way that you would do it is, let's just say you had traffic counts done at each of these sections, which is pretty unlikely, but let's say that you did. And say you had 2,000 there, you had 1,000 there on that leg, sorry. You had the 4,000 there, 6,000 there. Once again, what you would do is you would take worst case scenario and you would look at the 6 and look at the 2 between those legs and you would sum them. So you would have an 8,000 total, and that's what you would use for your exposure score. That's the same as if it's a cross intersection, so there's no stagger there, and you had different AADTs on each leg. You would take the 2 that have the highest and sum those ones. The other way that you could do it, and I don't want to complicate things any further, but you could also do 2 different matrices, which is, I'm going to do a matrix which is just this side of the dog leg, and then another matrix for that side of the dog leg. Don't get too caught up on that one. That's just another one. If they were significantly different intersection types and things like that, I would recommend that. We do have a fact sheet. I think I spoke about that yesterday. Yeah, I did. Where intersections has got its own fact sheet, because as I said, this one really, really trips people up. And as I also said, I think Austroads need to really tighten up how we do this. The same there is for the roundabout as well. So you would take the legs which have the highest AADT, the two of them, and add that up to get your exposure there. All right. I'll keep going through this matrix. The other crash type that I'm worried about, and I'm just going to make this up as I said in this scenario, is I'm going to put sideswipe crashes. I'm very concerned about that. And sideswipe crash types have the same level of exposure as my runoff road and head-on, so it gets the score of 2. Pedestrian numbers, cyclist numbers, we rarely have counts for them. But the way our scoring sheet works is the next sentence down, you can see for cyclist, pedestrian, and motorcycle crash types, where volumes are less than 10, you give it a score of 1. Where volumes are 10 to 50, score of 2, 50 to 100, score of 3. 100 or more per day, I should clarify that's per day, score of 4. Pretty unlikely that you'd actually have that data, so you do need to make some assumptions, and that's exactly why we start with defining the project context. So you've got a really good understanding of, are there pedestrian generators? Are there schools nearby? Is there a shopping center? All those types of things that could then lead in to help you make the assumptions for this. Of course, if you've got the data, you just use the data. It's much easier. But hypothetically, I'm going to say there's less than 10 pedestrians a day, score of 1. There's less than 10 cyclists a day, score of 1. Let me double check I got that correct, actually. Yeah, less than 10 is a score of 1. Motorcyclist numbers, once again, we don't always have this data either. And the assumption that we tend to use is 1% of the AADT. So you do generally have your AADT numbers. So you take 1%. So I've got 4,000 AADT. 1% of 4,000 is 40. I said that with a lot of apprehension. And I go back into my scoring sheet, and I know that if I'm between 10 to 50 units per day, I score it at 2. So I go back to my motorcyclist and I score 2. An easier way to remember that is just use the same score that you've got there, because if they'll be in the same category, basically. That's my little trick. But of course, as I said, if you've got the data and you know those counts, don't make those assumptions. Instead, use the data that you've got. That's my exposure. And as I said, that's the easiest, because you can actually just say, these are the metrics, and this is what I'm going to use to fill it in. And you can just go, done. The likelihood is where things get really, really fun. Because what you need to consider is, how likely is a runoff road crash to occur? And you need to clearly articulate what are the factors that are increasing that risk or that crash type occurring, and what are the factors decreasing that. So we've just jotted down some dot points. It's not every single dot point that you could imagine here, but things that will influence your runoff road crashes occurring. What's the speed? Is there curves in the road or anything like that? Are there sealed shoulders? Are there barriers there? What's the offset to those hazards? What's the condition of the line marking like? What's the guidepost spacing like? All those types of considerations for runoff road crashes. And this is why I say it's the fun part, because you can really go to town on this part and just jot down all these different issues within the environment, both that improve the runoff road, crash occurring, and decrease that risk as well. And I'm going to jump to my scores now. And instead, I'm going to just remove all this writing just to make it clearer. And I'm going to cross out the exposure and cross out the severity and focus just on that likelihood. And to get a score of 0 for likelihood, the way that it is defined is there is a minimal chance that a given crash type can occur for an individual road user given the infrastructure in place. Only extreme behavior or substantial vehicle failure could lead to a crash. It can be difficult to put down a 0 for any crash type. There's always kind of a link to that exposure there. And I would say don't get too caught up in the 0 there, because it's quite rare to actually put that. Instead, we look at the 1 to 4. So there could be some examples of that, but it's few and far between. So instead, I'm just going to go 1 to 4 with our crash likelihood. And let's have a look at these wonderful definitions. You would give it a score of 1 if you've analyzed the runoff road crash risk and you believe it is highly unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Full stop. That's all the information you get. You'd give it a score of 2 where it is unlikely that a crash type will occur. You give it a score of 3 where it is likely a crash will occur. And this one is so long-winded. I just say highly likely. It's just highly likely that's going to occur. But they do give you some examples in this last case. So an example could be if it's a high approach speed to a sharp curve, or there's a high chance of a runoff road crash there. Priority movement control, filtering right turn across several opposing lanes, or it's a high-speed environment, those types of things. They've given you some actual examples there of what a very high likelihood of that crash is. That would be a score of 4. But you can see those other ones are very, very subjective. The likelihood category is the most subjective part of the assessment, and it is the reason why we do these assessments within a team. You try to get other people's opinions. You do have a bit of a debate around it. I've been involved in several where things get quite heated, and it's a bit of fun. Some people really love to do a 2. Other people put their foot down and say, no, it has to be a 3. It must be a 3. And where you do get into those situations, the framework does allow for you to kind of meet in the middle and take a half value. There's no other decimal places. So you can't do 2.2.1 or something like that. You can only go to the half. And that's only where you're unable to get that clear definition into either of those categories. So keep that in mind, but we try to keep as close as possible into those whole numbers. Oops. Let's keep crossing that out. So I'll go back to our matrix, and let's say in this scenario for runoff road, I think it is likely that a crash will occur, and likely is a score of 3. I also think it's likely a head-on will occur, so that's a score of 3. I think it's unlikely that an intersection crash will occur, so I'll give that a 2. I think it's very unlikely an other crash, sideswipe, will occur, so I'll give that a 1. I'm just making these numbers up, as I said. This is not at all reflective of an environment. Pedestrians, I think, is, well, this is where it can be really important to ensure that you're reflecting on taking your exposure and your likelihood separate. So I've already said pedestrian numbers are very, very low. That's already been counted for. But now I need to think about, well, if a pedestrian was in that space, how likely is it that there's a collision that could occur? So you'd be thinking of, are there footpaths? Are there clear crossing points across the carriageway? What's the speed? Those types of things. In this example, I'm going to say it's highly likely a crash will occur. Similarly, if a cyclist was at this location, it's highly likely a crash would occur. Motorcyclists, you tend to reflect on the other scores that you've given, because you wouldn't necessarily give it a lower score than a runoff road or a head-on or an intersection, because those crashes can still occur to a motorcyclist. But you also think about other things like, you know, what's the skid resistance, what are the sight lines for the curves, you know, those 5 S's that we spoke about yesterday. You'd have a reflection upon that and maybe give it a score of 3. That's your likelihood. Now, of course, what I've just done here is had a very brief explanation and jotted down some scores. When you actually complete a safe system assessment, you complete this matrix and you say, these are the factors that increase the risk, you dot point it out. These are the factors that decrease the risk, dot point it all out. And this is why I'm giving it a score of 3. So you actually need to provide evidence. You don't just get to do a nice big number and then that's it, job done. You need to actually show why you're giving it that score. So there's some rationale behind it, or you can follow that logic. That's the likelihood. I'll check in there with Marissa to see if we've got any questions regarding the likelihood.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of questions. Is recorded crash history at a site referenced or considered in determining a final score?
Great question. Let's give a prize out there. So crash history is not a requirement as part of conducting your safe system assessment. It can be useful. It can give you some ideas of, some of the existing crash risks that have occurred in that environment. But as we know, there is a relative randomness in the crashes that occur. And you could be looking at this particular section where there's no crashes and just up the road, there's, a few more or something like that. It doesn't mean that there's no crash risk where you're looking at. So it can be, a little bit misleading if you're only relying on that crash data. I do think it's useful just to have a flick through and see if there's been any information that within that space. And we tend to, within AAAS, to provide that as an appendix. So we do conduct that analysis, but it's not necessarily driving what we see in this matrix. We are more thinking of this in a proactive space and not waiting for the crashes to occur.
Mm-hmm. Is there specific guidance on using half scores in any jurisdiction or Austroads guidance? Harris has heard mixed views on this and has seen 0.25 scores used.
So as far as I'm aware, I thought Austroads actually specified you can do half score, but no more. So I thought that was actually in the guides. I could be wrong about that. However, the 0.25, I also agree. I don't agree with that. I think that's too granular for the purpose of this type of framework. The only reason that I could potentially see that is, I'm going to have to skip ahead here, but the way that we come to our crash risk score is we multiply things. So if you had a score of 0.5 and then a 0.5 for exposure, for likelihood and severity, just as an example, that would get you a 0.25 just because of the multiplication. So it's not like the assessor has given it a 0.25, it's just the overall score would give you a 0.25. But yeah, I've only seen it go to the 0.5, and I've had the debate before with peers about trying to get more granularity, but I always keep it to that 0.5.
Okay. Thanks, Max.
No worries. And for your assignment as well, please no more granularity. So we've done exposure now, we've done likelihood. Now it's time for severity. We have that same kind of philosophy that we've been doing so far. And we consider each of these crash types and what would increase or decrease the severity of that crash. So you basically put yourself in the frame of mind that, okay, a runoff road crash is occurring within this environment. What are the things that will increase or decrease the severity of that crash outcome? It's actually, there's relatively few variables here. Speed, absolutely. How fast the vehicle is traveling is intrinsically linked to the severity of that outcome. So that's absolutely imperative to include that. Whether there's a barrier system there or not, you'd much rather crash into a flexible guardrail than, a utility pole or a rigid hazard. So also what type of infrastructure is there can affect that score. The scoring system for the severity, and I'll do the same little thing of just focusing on what I'm talking about. So just don't look at these ones. Crash severity for a 0 would be, there's only minimal chance that it would be an FSI. It follows pretty much the same definitions as what we've seen for our likelihood definitions. So for a score of 1, it is highly unlikely that this will result in a fatal or serious injury. For a score of 2, it is unlikely that it will result in an FSI. Score of 3, it is likely. Score of 4, it is highly likely that this will be an FSI. Now, this is exactly where the graph that I touched on at the start of the day, severity scoring guidance sheet, comes into play. So if you're not quite familiar with what different crash types, maybe that's likely or highly likely, where is that boundary? This is a really handy little chart just to help you gauge that information. So just as an example, if you've got a cyclist collision with a vehicle and the speed is at, say, 50 kilometers per hour, you'd probably put that in the category of around 3, which is a suggestion of it is likely that that incident will be a fatal or serious injury. So that's how you kind of read this. There is the note here that there's a general indication, you do need to do your own professional judgment. Perhaps you pose that 3 to your group and they're like, no, that's cyclist injury. That would definitely be a fatal or serious. That's not likely. That's highly likely. And maybe you go for a 4 or maybe a 3.5. So that it's just used as a bit of a starting point. So that's our crash severity. Similar bit terminology to what we've done for likelihood. I'm going to do the same exercise now and start picking some numbers for our... Oh, I accidentally rubbed off the wrong one. I can't remember what this number was. I'll put down 2. Run-off road severity, just as an example, let's say that if they run off road in this scenario, it's highly likely that that will be fatal or serious injury. If there's a head-on, it's highly likely that will be an FSI. If there is an intersection crash, it's highly likely. If there is a side swipe crash, I'm not really too worried about the severity. In fact, it's highly unlikely that that would be an FSI. If it's a pedestrian out there, though, very confident that will be a FSI. Similarly to a motorcyclist, and I'm running out of space here, similarly to a motorcyclist. So that's great. I've got all these wonderful numbers between 0 and 4, but we then need to actually change that into, well, what is the crash risk associated with each of these individual crash types? And as I alluded to before, the way that we calculate that is multiplying each of those scores for each crash type. I'm going to use a different pen color because I've got lots of different things going on here. So it's the exposure times the likelihood times the severity. So my run-off road crash risk score would be 2 times 2 times 4, which is 16. My head-on crash risk score, 2 times 3, 6 times 4, 24. And I'm just going to go through all of these now. So 3 times 2, 6 times 4, 24. 2 times 1 times 1 is 2. 1 times 4 times 4 is 16. 1 times 4 times 4 is 16. And the motorcyclist, 2 times 3 times 4. So 6 times 4 is 24. So now I've got crash risk scores for each of those crash types. And I'll give a prize out to anyone in the chat that wants to tell me what is the maximum score that I could get for each of those crash types. I'll give you 20 seconds or so to work that out. So what would be the highest score? Harris is correct with 64. And the reason that Harris worked that out is because that is 4 times 4 times 4. That's the highest score that you could get. And as I said before, you ideally want to get things low as possible. So if you've got a score out of 64, that is indicating that that crash risk does not align well with safe system principles at all. So that's kind of the first step that you would do. So that's multiplying all of those different crash types. Next, what you would do, you would create an overall score. So you can see, well, what does this scenario actually look like overall? And that would actually be summing each of those numbers there. So 16 plus 24 plus 24 plus 2 plus 16 plus 16 plus 24. I'm not going to do that now. That would give you a overall score. And the maximum score that you can get is 448. And the reason that number is because that's 64 plus 64 plus 64 plus 64, 7 times. I've gone through so much information and I realize I should give you a little break because you need to be able to process this. You're probably dying for a cup of tea or a coffee. So I'm going to give 4 minutes where I'll just leave it on this screen so you can process that. Go for a little stretch and I'll come back in 4 minutes time, okay? Okie dokie. Welcome back, everyone. I'm just going to keep going through this content, but please do keep asking those questions because this is really the crux of completing a safe system assessment. And if this is not clear, I really want you to ask all of those complicated questions. So that is how we do our SSA matrix. And the way that we would actually do this within practice, so I'll just give you this site as an example. This is what your existing conditions may look at. You may go out there on site and have a look and get a feel for the lay of land and things like that. You would do a safe system assessment matrix for your existing conditions, and that would give you a score, right? So you'd have a risk score associated with how the existing current site setup aligns with safe system principles. If you're also provided design options, so this is designing a roundabout or designing a modified T there, which is signalized, or squaring up that intersection and signalizing it as well, you would conduct individual safe system assessment matrices associated with each of those designs as well. So at the end of the day, you've got a score for your existing, which is like your benchmark, your base, and then you've got your design options as well. So you can clearly see which design offers the greatest level of benefits and which areas may need to be improved. This is just an example of one of the ones completed for that project. We have taken little bits and pieces out just to be able to fit on this screen. SSA tables can get quite large. It can run over multiple pages. But you can see that the way that it is all set up is consistent. So exposure, it's just saying that, okay, AATT is between 5 and 10,000. So we're giving it a score of 3. You're just clearly articulating any of those assumptions. All of that is done consistently for exposure. For likelihood, there's those dot points that I talked about. These are things that increase the likelihood. These are things that decrease. And because of that, I'm giving it a score of 2.5 out of 4. Same story with severity. You've got that discussion around things that increase the severity, things that decrease. Decided to go for a score of 2. The product, which is that multiplication I spoke about before, is provided at the bottom of the table. And then you've got a total overall, 118.5. So this is an example of a safe system assessment matrix that's been completed for the existing conditions. What you would do to then complete this same assessment for the roundabout option or any of the design options is you just simply copy and paste this exact table and do it again for the roundabout. And you use a little bit of formatting to make it clear where things have changed. So we've included this legend. which is, if it's black text, because it's just been copied over from the last one, then it's just a common factor in both of those scenarios. If it's got a strike through, it's suggesting that that issue is no longer relevant. It's not there anymore because of the design. And if it's red text, it's new. So just as an example, the likelihood, well, one of the items that have been crossed out there is the lanes are wide, appear greater than 3.5. That's no longer the case within the design. But what is new is it's got reasonably straight approaches and the bend has been removed. So that's no longer an issue. So that has been captured in the red. And you can also see that has affected the score. So it's now got a 1.5. It's showing that change there. You do that consistently. You do that for all your options as well. So you go back, you get your table for your existing, then you paste it for your signalized intersection with the modified T. You use that same formatting and you do that signalized intersection, which is squared up, more common as well. And you do that as well. So you're not writing it out, for each different scenario. You're taking your existing, that's your base case. You're taking that as a template and then adding or deleting based on that information. Marissa.
Max, is it common for SSA scores for various options to be one input of several in MCA?
Yes, it is. MCA, multi-criteria assessments. So part of a business case, a safe system assessment could be used to add value and demonstrate how safety or alignment with safe system principles is being managed. But you would have other things that you need to look at. What's the economic benefit of this project? What's the environmental impact on this project? All these types of different factors, and the SSA can be used as just one of those inputs.
And I think we might be covering this later, but the recommended number of participants in a team when undertaking an SSA?
Yeah, Ken talks about those real nitty-gritty details tomorrow, so I won't steal that content from him. Anecdotally, though, I've been involved in SSA teams of 3, and I've been involved in SSA teams of 15. So it's a little bit dependent. It can be fun to do a bit of a workshop and have lots of different stakeholders involved, but the other side of that coin is you may get people that are really adamant of certain scoring, and that just holds up things. I'll let Ken talk about that though. So we've got those matrices. We've done them for all those options now. And as I said, you'd provide like a summary of those scores. So the total that you could get is 448. But just looking at this high level summary, I can see that design option 2, the roundabout, is the lowest of the design options, indicating it's performing the best in terms of safe system principles. The modified T is doing slightly better than the squared up T. The reasons for that, you'd have to look into the matrix. That would actually spell out exactly why those scores are. However, all of those design options are doing better than the existing conditions, which is really positive. Like that's what you want to see. If you're proposing to, invest in infrastructure on your transport network, you would love to see that you are actually improving the safety of that environment. Of course, I've worked on several projects where that score has not decreased, indicating that things are not getting better. And I've had several project teams be upset with me that I'm not giving them a report that's saying that this is going to improve things. And it is one of those conversations that you may have to have if you're a safe system assessor. We base these things on our own professional judgment, so there is a degree of subjectivity to it. But if you're doing a project which is about reducing congestion, so if you're adding more traffic lanes, making it more difficult for pedestrians to cross, introducing additional traffic flows through there, it's hard to see how that could possibly benefit the safety. So there's also that conversation to be had as well. Maybe that's not the objective of the project. that's not really my call to make as an SSA working on this particular component. I'm there purely for the safety of it. So you may get involved in some of those conversations, but most of the time you get better scores, lower scores with the designs that are being offered. Already spoke to this graph here, which is just clearly articulating each of those crash types relevant to the different scenarios. So, okay, I know that the cyclist is not faring well in the roundabout. And perhaps I, as the safe system assessor, should be recommending, well, what else can we do for that cyclist to help see that bar graph get down much lower? And that leads in nicely to my next topic, which is talking about the recommendations. So the Safe System Assessment Report is not just completing the matrices and just being like, there you go, those are your scores, have a great day. You also get to offer your own insights as to say, well, here's what I think you could be able to do to improve those scores even further. I'll make a few comments here. The project team does not have to accept any of your recommendations. It is by no means like you've done this report and they have to do what you say. You are there purely as someone with no other ties to the projects and don't understand the financial implications, don't understand, time pressures and things like that. You're there with just the focus of, okay, this is a crash risk and it's very, very high for cyclists at roundabouts. Why don't you think about doing a protected roundabout? Or why don't you think about doing grade separation for cyclists? You can do that as a safe system assessor. It's the project team for then to respond to that and be like, this is not feasible due to X, Y, and Z, and just categorize that. And then that's it. It's not saying that we don't want to be the stick in the mud and say you have to do this because I've done this report and that score is too high. No, it's just about trying to improve things and make those suggestions to hopefully improve the level of safety. And the way that we categorize our recommendations are if it's a primary treatment or if it's a supporting treatment. A primary treatment all you need to remember is this: virtually eliminate the potential of FSIs. So it's basically like, if you install this, you will virtually eliminate the risk of a runoff road crash. And an example of that could be continuous edge barrier systems. If you do that, you will virtually eliminate the risk of runoff road fatal and serious injury crashes. They're still going to occur, but hopefully that barrier system is not going to result in a fatal or serious injury. Supporting is just the next tier down, where it's basically, it's going to improve things, but it's not expected to be, virtually eliminating FSI crashes. And this is where we see things like signalized intersections. That's going to improve things, but we know people still run through red lights, so there still is the risk of FSI crashes, and there's a lot of treatments there. And these are very well defined within the Austroads framework. So if you're unsure if this would be categorized as a primary or a supporting, no stress whatsoever. Austroads have already done that within the Safe System Assessment Framework. If you've also got difficulties in trying to determine, well, I know I've got a high cycling risk score, what treatments are available? Once again, it's within the Austroads guide there. It'll tell you if you want to do a primary treatment, do X, Y, and Z. If you want to do supporting, investigate A, B, and C. And that's you. That can help to equip you with these tools. The final category is non-safe system treatment, which is not something we use at all. It's purely for terminology. And it's basically saying that if you do that, it's not going to improve safety at all. So that's why you would never recommend it. You would never recommend something that's not going to improve the safety. That is a complete divergent aspect of what you're trying to do as a safe system assessor. So it's purely there for terminology. Right. You would also have some prompts here. Oh, sorry, Marissa?
No, that's okay. Would you like to take a question now or?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, okay. So if an SSA is done for a new road where a comparison can't be made with existing conditions, can the final score be used to objectively assess alignment with safe system principles? Is a score less than 150 considered to be good alignment?
Wow. Okay, that's some two questions in there, both excellent. If you've got a greenfield site, so you're building through paddocks and there is no existing condition, what you could do is you could analyze the route that traffic would currently take. So how do they currently get from that destination A to B? And you could build safe system assessment matrices on that route. And then you could compare that against what is being proposed as part of that design. So that's how you can analyze that. Ken does talk a bit more about that in tomorrow's session. So that's just a high level answer there for you. The second question there was about the scoring and what's considered, good alignment or poor alignment with safe system principles. And I think that's a very excellent question because it really acknowledges that these assessments are subjective. And if I did an SSA on existing conditions and 3 proposals, and I did my own matrices and things like that, and I did all the scoring, and I gave Ken the same site, the same designs to review, and we just did it, back to back, not looking at each other's answers, we would be pretty close, I would suggest. However, we would have discrepancies. We would unlikely have the exact same scores, and we're both very experienced within this space. So it's actually difficult to say a score of 100 means this is an excellent or a terrible or somewhere in between, because there are individual biases and there are subjectivity. The most important thing that you've got is you want one project team analyzing your existing conditions and your designs. So you wouldn't want me to do the existing conditions and then Ken to do the designs separately. You'd want that same group of people doing all of it because they have got their own relative risk analysis. So they, in their own mind, understand what is high likelihood of an intersection crash. They are able to, summarize that within their own understanding. I hope that kind of answers your questions. It is a tricky, it's not like level of service for those that have done CIDRA analysis where, if it spits out X units, then it gets the level of service A, and if it's Y units, then it's the level of service B. It's not as clear cut as that because it's more, you do have that subjectivity. Instead, it needs to be considered relatively within that entire project. So if I've got an existing condition that's saying a score of 300 and the design is proposing 100, I know the design is fantastic. If it's existing conditions of 300 and the design is 299, I know the design is not doing much at all. So it's very, very relative. Good question. Any other questions there, Marissa?
No, we're all good there, Max. Thanks.
No worries. So some other prompts that are part of the Safe System Assessment framework, which are to some extent relevant. Once again, I'd probably do these at the front of the report just to give you a bit more context. I don't think they add a significant amount of value, but maybe I'm just disillusioned because I've had to do these so many times. But just trying to think about, around different road users, is everyone there likely to be alert, compliant? Are there pubs nearby? Maybe there's going to be people inebriated or drug affected, or if it's long stretches of road, perhaps they're going to be fatigued. Just trying to, think of different avenues and things to consider. Vehicles, this is mostly relevant to, because this is, a very, very broad framework, and can be applied in numerous circumstances. This is more thinking about like if you were working in a privately operated site, say like a mining consortium, and you're doing an SSA in that kind of space. Well, how do we know that the vehicles entering that space are roadworthy? How do we know that they've got the right load capacities and things like that? A lot of this stuff is just not going to be applicable to the projects that you're looking at. It's purely listed here as prompts. We do still tend to include these in our reports and just do NA where it's not relevant. This last one, though, is useful to think about, in my opinion. Post-crash care. So where's the closest medical facility? So if there is a crash that does occur, how likely is it that an ambulance is going to be able to attend to that site within, a relatively quick period? And where I've actually seen that being used very effectively is during the SSA process of a job that was in a mountainous region, so up in the snowfields. And there was significant concern that if someone does run off road, it is going to take hours for emergency service to be able to attend that site. Now, we know that we've got a helicopter landing pad at the top of the mountain for the, chateau. What are they called? The snowfield hotel things there. But nothing in between. And so it's actually a recommendation to investigate, where along this route could we strategically put some helipads to hopefully gain access to those sites and reduce that time for waiting. And that then went on to, another separate body of work, which was looking into that. So there can be some, it's worthwhile to consider that approach as well. Okie dokie. Now we are going to be doing a Safe System Assessment Report. And when I say we, I mean you, because I've done heaps of them and it's your turn. The best way to learn this kind of thing is just roll up the sleeves and get stuck in, because the way that I've said it, the way that I interpret it is very much based on my own experience. And the best way for you to be able to appreciate what this framework is trying to achieve, their objectives, is just to get stuck in. So your assignment will actually be to complete a Safe System Assessment Report. You will be required to do a Safe System Assessment Matrix. In fact, you'll be doing 2 of them. You're doing one on existing conditions and one on the design. Your report is going to look something like this, where it's going to have lots of text that is highlighted in yellow. And that is the stuff that you're going to have to fill in. All the other text is just there as reading material and you don't need to edit. So just to confirm, yellow text, that's for you to fill in and do your work on. Everything else, just leave as is. Your assignment is going to involve you going out on site. Now, we've actually developed designs for locations near where you've told us. So you might have given us your office address or your home address or something like that. And we've developed a hypothetical design of an intersection that's near you. And we want you to go out there and visit that site. The reason that we find that so important is that it's very difficult to gauge the lay of the land and pick up on road safety risks without actually having boots on the ground and seeing that. So as part of doing your site inspection, we will require you to wear high visibility vests. We want to make sure that you're seen. We want to make sure that you are not putting yourself in danger. If you go to inspect it and, things have changed, or there's traffic management works going on, or it's not a safe time of the day, just don't do it. We don't want anyone to feel like we're putting them in jeopardy or it's uncomfortable. The sites that we have selected have undertaken our own kind of risk assessment where, you know, we would safely go out there and conduct this assessment, and we believe that it's safe for you to go out there. There's, you know, places that you can safely park, you can access adjacent footpaths, things like that. So please keep that in mind. But if you don't feel comfortable doing it, just we would much rather you say that, hey, can I have another site because I don't want to do this? Much rather hear that feedback than hear that, you know, you've forced yourself out there and something's happened. So keep that in mind. Don't be a hazard. We don't need you to do any, you know, measurements of traffic lanes. We don't need you to do any traffic counts and stay out there for hours or anything like that. We just want you to go out there, have a look, get a feel for it. We'll get you to take a selfie with your high-vis vest on, just as proof that you actually went out there on site. And we'll also get you to complete the SWIM, Safe Work Method Statement. We've already completed it for you. You just need to read through it and then sign off on it. Marissa will actually take you through that process. So I might just hand over to Marissa now, who will talk you through the next steps of this assignment.
Sure. All right. Well, I might steal the screen off you, Max. And
I see a question just came through, so I might just answer that while you get that through.
Sure.
So Adam's just asked, reduced speed comes up repeatedly in treatment hierarchy tables, but the guide to speed management is not supporting speed limit reductions. What do we do now? It's very, very tricky. So yes, speed is absolutely a contentious topic, and as soon as you start talking about speed reductions, people have all sorts of opinions. And I suppose just as a reminder, as a safe system assessor, you are solely focused on the application of the safe system assessment framework. And if speed reduction is deemed an important thing to mitigate that as a risk, as you've identified, as is supported by the safe system philosophy, then by all means you would include that as a recommendation. The next steps of that, as you know, how the client or how government can possibly take that information and turn that into action, is not your concern. Like, you are there independent of all that. You're just saying, I really don't think this should be 110 kilometers speed when there's no sealed shoulders, there's no barriers. I think you should either, you know, invest in that type of infrastructure or reduce the speed. So it's just about putting that information out there and leave it for those that are working within that space to deal with their own policies and processes.
All right. Okay, so I've just got our learning management system open up, as you can see on your screen there. So just into module 4. Once again, we've got the presentation from today there for you to have a look at any time. Under our tasks for this module, we've got the Safe Work Method Statement, as Max has gone through with you. So if you just click onto that one, I'm pretty sure something's going on with my internet. Nothing appears to be working for me.
Oh, do you want me to
Max,
take over?
You want to take over and share yours, because nothing is working for me now. I'm clicking on everything. My screen's frozen up. Nothing like a bit of live online training, isn't it?
Good fun, huh?
Can
you see the LMS?
Oh, yep, we're up. Okay, if you just scroll back
Module
down
4.
to module 4, and so yeah, we've got our Safe Work Method Statement there.
Oh
no, you too.
Oh no!
Oh no!
The LMS is crashing.
The system is down. Okay.
Does any participant want to see if they can try it? Mine's also doing that.
I'm just going to try it on another browser.
Module 4 quiz. Hang on, I've got.
Okay, that's.
I might just leave that one, and I'll see if I can get the assignment to work. complete your safe system assessment. Yeah, this one works. So let's talk
All
through this
right.
one.
That's what we need. Okay, so we did just show you that safe work method statement option. So if you just click on that, we've got a pre-prepared checkbox there for you to sign off on that one. So you can just have a read of the text that we've got there, and please just sign off on that. It just goes through everything that Max already spoke about. And okay, so your assignment. So we are going to get you out on site to do a safe system assessment. So we have allocated you all a site, as you can see there, all of those PDFs, that list of PDFs there that you can see. You should be able to find your name there next to one of them. If you can't find your name, please reach out, let me know, and we'll get one allocated to you. Hopefully the site that we've allocated to you is near your home or your office. We don't, if it's not by any chance at all, we don't want you driving an hour to get to a site. Please just let us know. We can reallocate you any of the sites, or if you see something else there that might be a bit more convenient to you, just again, let me know, and happy to allocate you another site there. We've got a couple documents there. We've got the first Word document. It's the SSA template, which Max will talk you through in a moment, and the SSA graph generator. So actually, perhaps Max, if you'd like to talk through the components of the assessment document, and then I can let them know how to submit it.
Sounds great. Okay, so this is what our assignment template looks like. Nice big reminder there that you only need to do the highlighted sections. So lots of it will not need to be edited by yourselves. So I'm just going to scroll through. Don't need to worry about an executive summary. You need to pop down your name. Don't worry about the prompts, because we don't want you to analyze the site in a lot of detail. Give us a little definition of what's going on with the design, and just the speed. That'd be fantastic. You'll need to provide a link to the graph, and I'll show you how to make that graph in a second. This is the Safe System Assessment Matrix that you'll be working on. Now, the first one is your existing conditions. So you're going to write down the comments, factors that increase likelihood, factors that decrease the likelihood, all of these types of things. In this first kind of matrix, this design is not relevant because you're only analyzing the existing. So the reason that we've got it there is purely for our markers. It makes it easier for them, but you don't need to worry about it. So this table does look different to the one that I showed before, but it's purely there for marking purpose. So when you do your existing conditions, I'm going to scroll down and show you an example of this filled in. You pop down your notes, you pop down your factors, you put in all your scores, but for the first one, don't worry about the design. So it's been crossed out. You'll also do a matrix based on your design that we provided in those PDFs. I'm just going to open one up just as an example. And oh wow, this is an excellent example. So this is the design that you would be reviewing. You would first do the existing conditions, and then you would do this one. And you'll also see that we provide this little text box call out thing, which says that these are the AADT values that we want you to take. You may know that these are not correct. That's fine. We don't care. We want you to use these values because, once again, when we review your information, we're checking against those numbers. So we want to make sure that you're using that. And you'll also see that motorcyclist volumes are not provided. So you will have to take that 1%, as we spoke about before. So this is just an example of what your design could look like. You fill out the matrix for that. And then we will get you to offer some recommendations. So those treatments, whether it's primary or whether it's supporting, you pop it in there. Only the highlighted stuff. The project response is obviously if this were to be submitted, the client can then say, yep, we'll do that, or no, we can't do that for XYZ reason. And then we've got Appendix A, where you can add the photo of yourself, the selfie out on site with your high-vis vest. There's Ken having a glorious day in New South Wales. In a real SSA, you'd take lots and lots of photos and you'd get, different angles and things like that. For this assignment, just the one, please, just your selfie, that is fine. And that's the report itself. As I mentioned, to get the graph, we also provided an Excel document, which is basically going to do it for you. So you just kind of pop in all your numbers, all your scores for your different categories. So runoff road could be 2, 2, 2. And then that score comes up immediately. And then the design option, it becomes 2, 1, and 2. So you can see that crash risk is reduced. And then you can just copy and paste that graph. So we just made this easy for you. Feel free to just copy this for your future projects as well. This is if there's one design option, but there's other tabs down below if you've got 2 design options or 3 design options. We use this at Triple S as well. So you can just have some of our IP if you want it, go for it. Or change the branding, make it your own, that's fine. We just, I'm sure you could all do this yourself within Excel, but rather than you spend more time than you need to, we just thought we'd give you the template there. Marissa, how do we upload this assignment?
Okay, if you want to head back to the LMS. Okay, so once you have completed your assignment, please PDF it if you can. We do prefer, the system just prefers a PDF. So if you just scroll down below, you've got a submission there. So just click on the add submission and you would upload your document, drag and drop in, just the usual upload. And just upload that, save. That will give us a notification that you've submitted your assignment. We'll have our markers grade your submission from there, and you'll get notification once that is done. Due date. So we've got our due date listed right up the top of the page there. Our due date is the 15th of December, so next Friday for this one here. So look, we're quite aware that there's a bit of a Christmas rush going on. December can be a bit busy. So if that date is a little bit problematic for you, please just let us know. We're happy to grant an extension. That's totally fine. So that's a bit about the Module 4 assignment. We do also have a Module 4 quiz that you'll find in the Module 4 tasks. So please, that will probably only take you 5 minutes or so. But if there's any questions in regards to Module 4, please let us know. I think we've covered everything, Max.
Yeah, so I'd recommend spend the rest of today's session. As I said, I wanted to allocate some extra time, go through that assignment, have a look through it. Ken tomorrow will be back on board and just drill him with any questions that you may have about that assignment, because it's your last chance to get that kind of face-to-face contact. And in terms of time spent for this assignment, I would expect about 2 hours, including the site inspection, to smash this out. If you're spending, days on it, it's too much. It's not meant to be that intensive. So just keep that in mind. You may be overworking it, and it's not something that we necessarily need as the output. But yeah, we wish you all the best. Hope you enjoyed the assignment. It's good fun. It's exciting to see your skills being applied, and it's good to be a reviewer as well, to see those skills being shown through.
Yeah, and we'll just mention as well, you are more than welcome to complete the the assessment as a group when you're out there inspecting the site, but we do ask that you submit your own report, please. Yes, your own report in your own words, but yeah, if you and your colleagues are allocated to the same sites, you're welcome just to conduct the inspection together.
Perfect. Yeah, but yeah, separate reports, separate wording, needs to be your own words. You can't just copy and paste from your colleagues.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Great. I've seen a few requests about changes in allocations. I'll get back to you outside of this module. I'll email you. I'll get in contact.
Sensational. Well, have a lovely day. Good luck with the quizzes. Been terrific
Yes.
working with this group. Very engaged, and I've liked the questions that have come through. Wish you the best with the rest of the course and with the assignments. Take care.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, well,
Bye.
bye.